Signore e signori, buonasera. Benvenuti a Tutti a Casa, brought to you by Casa Italiana and Zerilli-Marimò at New York University. We are delighted that tonight we're going to talk about a new book by Alessandro Raveggi, who is a colleague at NYU in Florence, where he teaches, and he also teaches at Gonzaga University, also in Florence. We are going to present Alessandro's new book, Grande Karma, Vite di Carlo Coccioli. Who is Carlo Coccoli? I'm sure that's your first question. In order to answer that question, we also can count on the help of a great friend of Casa Italiana, Michael Moore. Michael just finished the translation of The Betrothed by Alessandro Manzoni. It's for now the big enterprise of his life, but he has also translated the likes of Henry De Luca, Primo Levi, and many other authors. He was until very recently the chief translator and interpreter for the Italian mission at the UN, happily retired and engaging now only in literature. So we can count on him. And with Alessandro, we decided to invite Michael because of his knowledge of Italian literature, contemporary and not, and also of the American publishing world. Because Carlo Coccoli, that is forgotten in Italy, is even more forgotten, if not completely unknown in the US. And we are going to do something about that. Welcome, Michael, and welcome, Alessandro.
Thank you, thank you. You know, it's funny, this is the first time I'm actually seeing Alessandro. We were Facebook friends, I think, and I've kind of admired his energy, I would say, you know, from afar. So it's nice to have this opportunity. And this is the first book that I've read. I've been digiuno, you know, for a while. I've been so busy finishing The Betrothed that I just had to stop reading. So it was a really nice kind of baptism, I guess, or a reawakening into contemporary Italian literature.
And Michael,
yes,
shall we start delving into the question, who was Carlo Coccoli and why is he now completely or almost completely forgotten?
Absolutely, because you could say that the novel is many things. I mean, of course, since you are Florentine, Alessandro, I have to compare you to Dante and see it as a bit of a four-part allegory, if we like, with many different layers. You know, we have this story of a detective story in a certain sense, this young, what the Italians call a ricercatore, maybe an assistant professor, we could say, trying to track down information about this writer who he had never heard of before, except lightly, and going to Mexico. There is that one story. There is, of course, at the focus of this novel, Coccoli himself and the mystery of his life, a very eclectic life, which I'd like to hear from you about. But there's reflections, of course, there's the narrator himself and the change that he's going through as he enters Mexico. I'd be very curious to hear how Mexico has impacted your life. And a deeper reflection, a reflection autobiographical again, on who you want to be as a writer. I found myself asking a lot, and especially considering this kind of obsessive quest for Coccoli. And then finally, a reflection really on Italian literature. Today, its relationship to the past, canon formation, the notion of what is a good writer, a bad writer, who are we encouraged to read, and why are we not encouraged to read some others? So maybe we could start with Coccoli himself.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, Stefano, for this invitation. I'm very happy to talk about Coccoli to an American audience, not only American, but because, as you said, Coccoli is completely neglected, not only in Italy, but I mean in the United States and America, not in Mexico and Latin America probably, but in the United States, yes. Who is Coccoli is hard to answer the question. Probably you have to write a novel, I would say. Because many readers of my novels said to me, "Why you wrote a novel and not a biography?" Because it's hard to basically describe the life of the many lives of Carlo Coccoli, as you can read at in the subtitle of this title, Grande Karma, Lives of Carlo Coccoli. Why? Well, Carlo Coccoli was a man of the same generation of Italo Calvino. He was born 1920 in Livorno, so he's a Tuscan writer and a Tuscan author. He had, I tried to compact. I mean, make it very, very easy introduction to his life and to understand his books as well. He had this, in my opinion, amazing youth in Tripoli, no, the Italian Tripoli, where he encountered three different faiths, no, the Jewish, the Italian Catholic, we can say, and Islamic faith. And he described this encounter as a very important for his life. After this experience in the African desert, we can say, he returned to Italy with his family. And after he studied the African tales of animals, about animality, as a thesis, his laurea, no, in Italy. And after that, he embraced the partisan liberation war, no, the partisan war. And he became a relevant, we can say, leader, no, of a group of partisans who free Florence and Tuscany. So we can say, so he's a partisan, he's a young Italian in Africa. And after that, he decided to start writing. And he worked for a famous publisher at the time that was Vallecchi. Vallecchi was one of the most important publishers at the first 20 years of the 20th century in Italy. Then basically, no, decay. And at Vallecchi, he was in the press room. And in Vallecchi, he encountered a writer who is very important for him and for his career. That is Curzio Malaparte. Curzio Malaparte, I don't want to open that door because it's, and I know that there's another Tutti a Casa on Curzio Malaparte in Paris. So it's important, it's a good link. But I mean, Curzio Malaparte probably was the worst mentor to find in Italy at the time, because Malaparte was wasn't neglected, but basically the literary circles in Italy hate him because he was a controversial figure, no? And because he spent a lot of time probably more, I mean, pairing with the French writers more than Italian ones, we can say. So Malaparte decided that Carlo Coccioli, the young Italian writer, need to be famous in Paris. So he sent it to Paris, and in Paris, Carlo Coccoli became very famous. And so he became, in 1950s, probably the most important, we can say, Italian writer in France, but not in Italy. Well, it wasn't completely neglected. There were critics like Carlo Bo who recognized his value. But after that, he decided to start writing in French, and so is one of the most important, we can say, Carlo Coccoli. It's writers in Italy who write in both French and Italian. And in Paris, he was in contact with, for example, Jean Cocteau, that is an important, relevant poet, no, and dramaturg in France. Is one of the leading figures, no, of the post-World War II Paris. And but after that, and this is defined probably the attitude towards life by the same Carlo Coccoli. For love of a man, he decided to leave France, to leave Paris, to arrive in Mexico. And and we have no time to describe this transition because it's very complex to understand why Carlo Coccoli, at the beginning of the 50s of the 20th century, decided to move to Mexico. But we can say that he did it for love. Love of a Man. He was Carlo Coccoli was the author of a very important book for the homosexual culture, for the gay culture. That is Fabrizio Lupo. Fabrizio Lupo is probably the first Italian novel who described the trouble of being the issue of being Catholic and homosexual at the same man in Italy. In a very, I mean, it's very. He anticipating a lot of topics, not only this one.
Alessandro, sorry for the interruption. As we said, we're gonna keep you on track with asking you even more questions. So geographically, we have Livorno, Tripolitania, Cyrenaica, that Africa, Oriental Africa, Fascist Africa, Florence, Paris. Mexico City,
Mexico.
Then Then we have short stays in the United States, particularly in Texas, of all places.
San Antonio, right?
Where he would not stay long, but still. And then Florence again. So already these constant misplacements. He's an author who is never in the same place. And that's a lot of your book, is these hunting for him, hunting for memories of him, for his relics, literary relics, spiritual relics, in all the places where he lived. And as you mentioned, plurilingual. He's an author that writes in Italian, French, and Spanish. Very successfully. It's not like marginal. In Mexico, he becomes this authority. He has columns in major magazines and newspapers, where he also writes columns and editorials for Corriere della Sera, Journal, and other Italian publications. But in Mexico, he's sort of an authority. And what Coccioli says is discussed in intellectual circles and so on. And even in Paris, of course, the one that strikes me the most is his relationship with Coco Chanel, of all people. So not only Cocteau and the literary milieu, but really
we can say the connections in terms of intellectual collections. Amazing.
Of all kinds. So not simply living there at the margins, but he was right in the middle of the intellectual life of the places where he went. And then the question again, what was wrong? Why was there this sort of ostracism? And of course, you explain it. One of the reasons that you said very rightly so, that if you have to pick a mentor, Malaparte is your worst choice. And thank you for mentioning the previous Tutti Casa we did. It was a brilliant discussion of the new translation of A Foreigner in Paris by Malaparte that is quoted abundantly in the book. Malaparte, just for the people who didn't have the fortune of listening to the previous Tutti Casa, extremely controversial. Fascist, anti-fascist, communist, Maoist. He was always on the wrong side of things. And he always wanted to be a Bastian Contrario. When everybody was saying red, he would say white. And everybody was saying green, he was saying yellow. And very controversial also. He was accused of being an opportunist, camaleonte, chameleon that would change color according to what was more advantageous for him. So, and himself, a very difficult person. And we have a sample of that in the part in which you describe they're constantly looking for each other, at the same time not finding each other, not meeting. It's always about missed encounters. And then there is a fall off also in the relationship between the two of them, between Malaparte and Coccioli, the two maudits auteurs of 20th century Italian literature. How come there is this fallout after they seem to like each other? They're both anti-communist, they're both anti-literary establishment, they're both Moravia haters, just to define them. And then what happens?
Well, I think that Coccioli read La Pelle, The Skin by Malaparte, and found that the description of the homosexuality and the homosexuals in Naples during the American liberation was not so accurate or not so correct, and he accused Malaparte, his friend, he said a thing like, you can't describe the homosexuality like that. I'm not, for example, able to describe lesbians, So I mean, it's an idea of disrespectful description of homosexuality in Malaparte. So basically, I think this is a theory of the many theories of my book, that is a novel, as you said, is that they basically have this kind of a fall of the relationship due to this issue. And Malaparte, well, we can have another conversation about that. I don't want to say it was homophobic, but a little bit probably. And so this is one of the reasons. No, the other one is that Malaparte will die 6 years, we can say, after the last letter that we have, no, because there's a very interesting correspondence between them in Milan, in the library in Milan, and you can read, everyone can read that. And it's a very interesting because they describe all the battles, literary battles in Italy. They describe Italian politics. So it's a very interesting document, no? And that I quote the document. This is one of the things that I do in this novel, is to tell a story, or many stories, of the life of Carlo Coccoli using this character that Michael mentioned. And at the same time, the documents and the letters and the correspondence and also the novels by Carlo Coccoli come out, no, like in a very, we can say, modernistic.
I thought it was very interesting the way you sort of stitched in pieces of Coccoli's own writing into this narrative by this character who sort of stand in for you, Enrico. I was kind of wondering why you didn't just say Alessandro for the character and mix it up a little bit more.
Because one of the things that I don't consider the book, well, it can be a very far autobiography, or a kind of autobiography, a very creative autobiography, because I used my probably knowledge of Mexico and my travel experience, finding all the traces of Carlo Coccoli. But Enrico, it's more like a filter that I use, no, to put a distance between me, the narrator, and this kind of a very magmatic life of Carlo Coccoli. At the same time, the character Enrico, it can be seen as a kind of a filter to understand why the Italian, we can say, mindset, or the Italian culture deny the presence of Carlo Coccoli in the Italian canon. No, because it's a story of someone who is do not understand Coccoli, but at the same time is attracted by Coccoli, no, by this quest, no. And the very beginning, Enrico represents Italy in a sense, no, the Italian culture. That,
but I mean, if I may, he's also a character with whom I think many of your Italian readers might identify with. You know, I mean, how many young writers, or literati, if we want to call them that, are in this position? You know, they're sort of studying, then they end up with this mentor, this professor whom you call merendone, you know, which I wouldn't know how to translate it to capture the humor, but there they are, sort of enslaved to, you know, the big professor for really almost their entire adult careers. You know, I always thought it was funny the way in Italy they call you giovane, they say that you're young, up until the age of 50, 55. Sí. And I had a friend, I studied art, and one of my colleagues, very talented, just said, I'm so sick of going to the foundry. He was 50. I'm sick of going to the foundry and everyone asking me, where's your professor, you know?
Yeah, it's a, I mean, you know, it's a, in a sense, the idea of the academy that someone has in Italy, not everyone, but I mean, I think there's this idea that you have to leave your own Bildungsroman, no, if you want to survive in the academic every year or every 6 years, no, you have to do this precarious path. And I want to, I mean, make fun of that, no, and in a sense, do a parodic academic fiction, no. I think this
right.
is
and I was thinking a little bit of these sort of travel narratives in a sort, or coming of age stories where he goes to Mexico to get dirty, maybe a little bit, and Mexico is often plays that part. You know, I mean, there's so many stories of Americans going to Italy where they suddenly become more refined, that they get in touch with their sensuality. But for some reason, when you travel to Mexico, you get dirty, you know.
And you get lost. I mean,
get lost.
And you probably you don't know, but at the end you got lost. No, and I use Mexico.
Or you
City.
get decapitated, right? That's the big fear in Florence when Carlo announces that he's going to Naples. You're going to be decapitated.
Yeah.
They're going to cut your head off.
With regard to Mexico, it certainly had a big impact on your life. And I think one of the pleasures of reading the novel for me was actually like walking through Mexico City, you know, going to the Sanborns Cafe, Los Azules, you know, visiting some of the places that I know, Cuernavaca, for example, Tepoztlan, you know, all of this. Mexico has played a big part in your own life, hasn't it?
Yeah, I was in Mexico 4 years and I lived there. And this experience that I try to recreate of being stuck in different languages is an experience that you can have in Mexico City itself, because it's a very I mean, obviously Spanish is the language, no, but it's also, in a sense, a very American, in my opinion, city as well. No, it's a kind of Los Angeles, you can say, with all these highways and all this stuff. But I mean, this idea of a translingual experience come from that, no, from this chaos that you can perceive in the streets of Mexico City. At the same time, the French culture is in Mexico the most important one. No, so it's a very, I mean, it's a complex thing. So, but the idea is that Mexico City here is like a place that you go and you don't find an exit. No, and so when you see that your life is, you spend your time losing tracks, no, or basically burning your time. And this is a thing that Enrico, no, said during the novel. You don't find the exit in that kind of city that is full of symbols and is attractive but repulsive at the same time. And this is I want to also to refer to one of my authors, in a sense, that is Roberto Bolano, because in Roberto Bolano itself you find that on one side you have Mexico City, on the other side you have the desert, no, and the desert is the scary place in Mexico, no, and I say that in the desert there are all the heads that are cut and raw, no, and a very graphic thing that I say. But this is a kind of a homage to my experience of Mexico, that is a very urban experience, because I probably know better Mexico City and other places. But also, as you said, there's Cuernavaca, the place of the eternal spring, no, so called the city of eternal spring, and the other place that Carlo Coccoli lived. Carlo Coccoli arrived from Paris, as I said, to Mexico, and decided to, as you said, get dirt, no, of being in Mexico, because he was, we can say, also depressed for this lost love, and at the same time, Carlo Coccoli grew a lot in Mexico. He became probably more famous there than here in Italy, no? And Mexico is probably the place where Carlo Coccoli had a kind of glory, we can say, because he, for example, it's very interesting that he described, for example, the relationship that he had with the presidents of United States of Mexico, because we have to say United States of Mexico, and he received a lot of gifts, no, Christmas gifts from the president. So to understand, no, the relevance of Carlo Coccoli in Mexico, and completely, and at the same time was completely forgotten in Italy.
Stefano?
Alessandro, yes. One other very key issue in Carlo Coccoli is his spirituality, his religiosity. And that could be another reason for being alienated, neglected, and then forgotten. His very unorthodox relationship with religion. Extreme Catholicism, and at the same time open homosexuality in many of the stories that he tells. Then there is his interest in Orthodox Judaism and his conversion to Judaism. His mother might or might not have been of Jewish origin from Livorno, but anyway, he was educated Catholic, and then there is this interest for the Kabbalah and Judaism. And after that, the discovery of Hinduism, and finally Buddhism. That's, I believe, the last stage. And it's not a superficial, he really embraces these religion with a lot of interest, with a lot of passion, studying. And alongside, there are also fattucchiere, indovine, psychics, palm readers.
Hare Krishna as well, you know.
Hare Krishna. There is all sort of other things. So first of all, how do you assess his hunger for all these different religious experiences? And do you think his attitude towards religion, that we could say omnivora or bulimic religiosity, might have impacted also his lack of fortune in Italy, especially, but not only?
Well, I always say that to be a good writer in Italy during the 20th century, you should be or communist or Catholic. And at the same time, you know that being communist and Catholic at the same time is an option, no? Because many, I mean, I think about the case of Pasolini, no? Many ask me why Carlo Coccoli and Pasolini do not have a kind of a correspondence, no? Why they don't have a link? Because Pasolini had a discourse, a cultural and literary discourse that is can be a dialogue with Catholicism. No? Carlo Coccoli denied the fact that he was a Catholic writer in 1953, probably in a letter to Curzio Malaparte, in 1952, in a letter with Curzio Malaparte. Basically, he dropped this idea of being a Catholic and he say, I will embrace a new spirituality. And he considered this kind of exile through different faiths an option for his life. No? So this is why at the end he decided to arrive to the pianerottolo. I don't know how to translate it into English. Michael, help me.
The landing.
A pianerottolo Buddhista, because there's no any other option.
Yeah.
At the same time, he said he was a kind of a animista, no?
Yeah.
In a sense, pantheist, and this is one of the interesting things of Carlo Coccoli, because at the end he wrote things about, for example, quantum physics and religion, because he considered that animism is an option also for a scientist, and he has a kind of a weird theory, you know, and but he's very contemporary. Can be considered a kind of a new ageism, no?
So what was that? Which makes me wonder, what was your introduction to Coccoli? I mean, why? Clearly, this was an obsession for you.
Well, this idea is to write a novel to basically dismiss this obsession and to have a structure of this obsession at the same time. Well, I was in Mexico, as you said, and I remember there was a bookshop of used books, and there was someone who approached me and say, "You know Carlo Coccoli?" And I say in Spanish, and I say, "No, I never heard." And I said, "Why? You are Tuscan. You are Italian, you are in Mexico, and you are a writer. Why you don't know Carlo Coccoli?" And after that, I decided to look for his books, no? And I found the Spanish books first, then the French book, and then the Italian one. In the libraries in Mexico, but not only in Mexico, because we have to mention that in the Harry Ransom Center in Texas, there's a good amount of manuscript by Carlo Coccoli. So near Philip Roth, I think, and then near David Foster Wallace, we have also Carlo Coccoli in America. But anyway, the idea was to look for the author, and suddenly I've been trapped, like my character, no, in this kind of myth, no, and every myth has ghosts, as hidden chambers and rooms, and so I've been a very interesting thing that at the end I decided to write a novel, so something that is fictional, and to probably also, I don't know how to say, cure myself from this obsession. No?
I mean, you ended up. Did you read everything that Coccoli wrote?
Not every. Probably is impossible, because he wrote more than 40, I think, novels and books, and in different languages at the same time, no? But I try to read the memoirs and the diaries by Coccoli, and I think it's probably the not the most important, probably production, obviously in terms of literary, but it's interesting because you understand how he played with his own life, with the diaries, with the correspondences, because you find the complete pictures of an author that is also life, no? In a sense, it probably is not only with Coccoli, with every writer. Now, when you read the correspondence and letters and you compare them with the books, no, you find, for example, that he mentioned a character in a different way because there's a reason. So he plays with reality a lot, and I enjoy a lot to play with his own reality in the book. This is why my novel shifts, not from different kind of way of narrate this life, no, from the diary to the travelogue in a sense, or the detective story, and so I enjoy a lot this idea of playing with the cards of Carlo Coccoli in a different way.
And do you see him as a kind of, I mean, is he someone who you have modeled yourself after in a certain sense, who has impacted your writing, who you admire as a writer? I mean, sometimes when people do a literary biography, for example, or when you start reading someone intensively and extensively, you get sick of them and you start to hate them almost. I mean, did you have anything like this happening to you? A certain just being a little bit sick of it all, or
I was a little bit sick probably of the voice of Carlo Coccoli, because probably when you read a lot of an author, you recognize his voice on the characters. It's a kind of, I don't know if it's clear, but I mean, it's like when you read Roberto Bolano, no? Sometimes you get sick of the voice of Roberto Bolano in all the books by Roberto Bolano, and then you admire him at the same time, no?
Yeah.
So in my opinion, was the same, was finding the voice of Carlo Coccoli in this book, the part that it was kind of repelling me a little bit. But it's interesting that I use Carlo Coccoli to reread many other authors, and this is an experience that I do as a reader, not only as a writer. No, I can say that I find him very innovative. No, because Fabrizio Lupo is very innovative, and the way he, for example, rewrite the neorealistic novel with Il cielo e la terra is amazing, in my opinion. No, because he created a novel only with documents, no, with again with diaries and correspondences, and this is very innovative, in my opinion, for the Italian literature at the time. But at the same time, I use Coccoli to return to Italy to many other writers. There are female writers. And I use Coccoli, for example, to reread Gianna Manzini, because I found that there's a line in Italian literature that is the Tuscan line. That is important, probably will be important, no? I feel that you read the writers and you understand that other forgotten writers, like, as I said, Gianna Manzini, for example, no? Or Anna Banti for a while has been, no? Or writers that use, as Coccoli did and I did, in a very creative way, biography, no? Like Gianna
Alessandro,
Manzini.
They're preparing publishing initiatives to celebrate Coccoli's centennial, that is writing this year, 2020. And especially Coccoli's nephew, if I understand, Marco Coccoli, who is responsible for this small imprint, Piccolo Karma, and they're preparing things. Tell us what you know, so that people also can keep their eyes on the upcoming publications of Coccoli that maybe were not available.
Yes, there's an independent publisher that is Lindau. Lindau is a pretty famous independent publisher in Italy. They decided to republish all the books, 17 books by Carlo Coccoli, and so it's amazing because it's in general the publisher use the most important books, not 10 or 15 books. So it's important because it helps the reader to retrace the production of Carlo Coccoli, and this is very important. Another very important initiative has been the celebration of the centenary by the Biblioteca Nazionale Centrale di Firenze. That is one of the most important institutions, no, in that sense, in Italy. So it is a kind of a way to recognize, no, the value of Carlo Coccoli for the centenary. I hope that after my book, I don't know, and after this work by Lindau, other publishers in France, for example, no, will decide to republish Carlo Coccoli, no, because as I said, it's important not only in Italy, no, to rediscover this author, and I hope in the United States as well, no, because it's as I said, is an author with a lot of contemporary topics. No, there's this idea of queer spirituality, we can say. There is also the idea of animality that is important in a world that talks about animal rights. No, that is the same idea of spirituality that you find in him is interesting. So I think that he's a very contemporary author, as someone said.
Now that reminds me. I think that in a certain sense, so this book and he fits into a larger project that you have as a writer. You're very engaged with the literary past with writers that have sort of no longer being read today. And in Italy, it's very common for a book to simply disappear, like not to be reprinted. Or even, major authors, and suddenly for some reason, the publishing houses just decide to stop printing books, and make someone disappear. I mean, I've noticed that you've been very interested in Bompiani, for example, a great writer who I don't think is very well read. Even Moravia, I think, you've just sort of bemoaned the fate of so many writers of the past. I mean, in a sense, we had, I thought, terrible stasis in Italian literature, the 1970s and 80s. I mean, it was really sort of fossilized. And there have been many young writers emerging now, and it's a very exciting moment. But in terms of the canon, you know, the literary canon in Italy, it is sort of sterile in a way that I see you fighting. I mean, it seems to rotate around the same few figures. There seems to be a kind of notion of linguistic purity, which I'm surprised by, and a kind of very insular tradition in Italian literature where it's imagined as being freed from all influences. And now we've gone to the other extreme with contemporary literature where everyone is trying to sound like an American. It's a problem for me when I'm trying to promote an Italian writer, like I'll translate an excerpt and then the publisher will say, the American publisher say, well, this sounds just like David Foster Wallace, or this sounds, you know, and of course, then it becomes less interesting in translation than it might have been in Italian. But maybe just this is my roundabout way of asking you a question about your larger project then as a writer and as a critic.
I hope. I mean, in the sense that, as you mentioned, Paolo Volponi is one of the writers who decided to write in, for example, Corporale parts in Spanish. No, so he decided to reinvent the Italian a little bit. No, in a sense, and it's also this is why it's hard probably to translate. No, but also for the topics that he touched. And I feel that at the same time, today there are contemporary writers. I mentioned Claudio Durastanti, for example, who decided to be between cultures and between tradition. That is a very important new point of view, probably also to write in a different Italian. Now, in this book, one of the things that my editor hate for this book is using Spanish and French. No, and it's not like because I want to be elitist. No, but because I feel that is a challenge for the contemporary Italian literature to find different languages, not in a way like sounds like David Foster Wallace, so I use the English, no, or sounds like Gide, so I use the French. So I hope that for the future, also in terms of topics, but in terms of language, is very important. The foreign publisher will accept writers who write not like David Foster Wallace, but in a different Italian. And this is a challenge also for me as a writer.
Stefano?
And no, I think it was great to come to a close of our conversation with the issue of the canon. And also because, as Michael was saying, it's also part of what Alessandro has been doing in his literary career, both as a critic and as a writer, to sort of rethink who makes it.
And who doesn't. For example, I was involved in June Lahiri's anthology of Italian short stories. And I was asked to translate a short story by Alberto Cespedes. Phenomenal writer, phenomenal, you know?
Yeah.
And it's such an amazing story. It was called Invito a pranzo, you know, meaning dinner, of course. And in just 4 or 5 pages, she gives you this portrait of Italy right after the war and the sense of humiliation. And it turns out she was phenomenally successful during her life, you know, a great writer, and then disappeared, you know. So I've been, you know, proposing Non si torna indietro, for example, novel, which was translated into like 40 languages and a bestseller all over the world and not available in Italian today, you know, to my knowledge.
No, not so much. I mean, there's probably out there, there's a wild canon, as I said, of Italian literature that is more kind of a various and we can say plural, no? That is also regional sometimes, but not necessarily because they use dialect, no? Because they're the Tuscan scene that is very, I mean, I it happened to me that I studied and I read a lot of Tozzi and Papini, for example, that is another writer that has been completely neglected and it was very famous for a while, not only in Italy, no, all over the world. I think a little bit also in the United States, no, the very thanks to Prezzolini. I don't know if I'm wrong, no. And this is probably the idea that I would like to not me as a writer, but in general as probably more like a critic, no. That there is a wild canon, an open canon of the Italian literature, and I think it's time because we are in a pluralistic time, also in terms of publishing houses, no. Because we don't have anymore probably these two players, no, the Grenaudi and Mondadori, and I think, no, and so we have multiple players, and we have freedom, probably not only to write but to translate. I hope, no, and to publish.
And I think with this more general assessment from Alessandro, we have brought our conversation to a close. I think it's very important, first of all, to read Alessandro Raveggi's book, Il Grande Karma, Vite di Carlo Coccioli, to help bring back Coccioli into the discussion of Italian literature. I'm very hopeful, personally, regarding the United States. The fact that a controversial author like Curzio Malaparte is seeing these return of attention, and I believe it has to do with the end of ideologies, of ideological preclusions, and also of a certain literary clique that is no longer in charge or in control of what gets published and what doesn't. So I think that something similar could happen, and I hope that something similar could happen to Carlo Coccoli, that despite the neglect in which he has been relegated, remains a phenomenal figure for the variety of his interests, for the diversity of the voices that he's able to evoke in his writing. And for this, I think we can thank Alessandro Raveggi for his book.
Thank you.
And we look forward to the publication of Carlo Coccoli's 17 works that are upcoming. We'll keep our eyes out for it. And we'll keep our friends updated on the return of Carlo Coccoli that deserves to happen. Thank you to Michael Moore, and thank you to Alessandro Raveggi.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Stefano.
It's a pleasure.
A pleasure.
Hope to see you all in person soon.
Yes, and next week, Tutti a Casa comes back Thursday at the same time, and we're going to have, the host is going to be Laura Caparrotti, the director of our theater company Residence, and the topic is going to be Italian-American women in comedy, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Don't miss the next program of Tutti a Casa next Thursday. Grazie.
Ciao a tutti.
Ciao.
Ciao.